Hello and welcome to the Anime Ramblin Boiz podcast, ARB for short. I am one of your hosts, Tropical Robot. What happened to Ricky-kun? Some say that he transferred to a high school and found some illicit material while searching through his roommate's room. And these are my co-hosts.
Hey, what up, everybody? I'm Bass. I swear to God, I've never been a big fan of anthropomorphic animal stuff. And yes, it's partially a personal thing, but this show might have changed my mind.
Hey, y'all. It's Tex over here. And I swear I haven't been to no night markets, but Texas might need to go to jail now.
Hey, everyone. I'm Silver, and I hope you all enjoyed the greatest story of this past year, which dictates the art of the simp. This is arguably the best simp story of 2019 and 2020.
Whoa.
Wait a minute, what?
Story can come down to him being a simp. Don't tell me I'm wrong.
No,
I am right.
Not at all. You are wrong.
We'll save our simp talk for later.
Man, I should have made a Zootopia reference.
I made Zootopia references throughout the entire show.
Alright, so as you all may or may not have surmised based off of our incendiary comments, we actually watched Beastars, or rather the first season of Beastars, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this podcast. So as we get started, y'all know the deal. Let's do it. General impressions of the show, gentlemen. What did you think?
First things first, arguably top 10 anime I've ever seen in my life. I don't know where it is in that top 10, but it's somewhere in there. Definitely a 9 out of 10, not a 9.5 or a 10, because I don't give those out very easily. Only one anime that I've ever watched is like a 9.5. But as good as the anime was, I think it's important to start off by highlighting a very, very obvious weakness of the show that I endearingly like to call the Code Geass syndrome, which is basically either the artwork or the animation is obscure enough that the literally gets people to not even watch it. I can't even tell you the amount of people that I know personally that didn't watch Code Geass, even though it's one of the greatest anime of all time, story-wise at least, that just didn't watch it because of the art. I can imagine that it's the same case for Beastars. A lot of people probably didn't watch for either the characters being animals or the little, all the animation is CGI, which took a long time of me watching it to really get used to. The only thing that kept me going, if the story was even a tenth less good than it was right now, I probably wouldn't have finished it, because it was it was literally hurting my eyes in the first few episodes. But maybe that's because I'm blind and have glasses. But aside from that,
that's interesting, because it didn't bother me as bad. I mean, there were a few moments where background characters were kind of jank, but yeah, agreed. It's a great show. It's probably one of the best shows I watched this year, if I didn't watch Code Geass this year for the first time.
And we'll talk about those people that have shit to say about Code Geass later.
But no, it's pretty great, and as I said before, interesting. Yeah, I was originally put off because I'm not a big person that likes anthropomorphic animals. If you want to think it's just because I don't like furries, you can say that, but no, that's not why. It's just I usually felt like I couldn't connect to animals as well as I can just people. It's more of just I just prefer watching things with regular people. But the way that this story is laid out, the animal parts are actually important and not just puns and stuff. So overall, and then the plot is fantastic. So overall, yes, it's very good. It's definitely a must watch.
For me, I really enjoyed it too. I don't know, I grew up watching Sonic the Hedgehog and Jimmy Neutron, so this basically combined them both.
Nani?
So I was really okay with all of it, but I think it brought up some really good things.
Can you explain the Jimmy Neutron thing?
Nani?
Yeah, I was gonna
wait, have y'all not seen Jimmy Neutron? If you look at Jimmy Neutron,
I think he's talking about the animation style.
Yeah, the animation style, not from the characters. No, we're not.
I'm you watched the wrong Jimmy Neutron.
It's Sonic X Jimmy Neutron equals Beastars.
Hey man, you do what you do on your own time. I ain't judging.
I'm about to make some bold claims this podcast. If y'all don't think Louis is Jimmy Neutron, y'all didn't watch Beastars.
What?
No, but
no. If anyone, Juno is Jimmy.
Wait a minute, that's even bolder. That's even bolder. But let me get back to my impression. I did love the show. My friend, before we even watched this, talked about watching it for the podcast. I binge watched it one time, twice. Actually, twice. My friend had me watch it at his house, and I was like, bet. And during some interesting scenes with some real bonding moments, I had to look at him and be like, what are we watching? We'll get into those later. But it was a great show overall. Then had my little brothers try and watch it. I was like, come on, y'all. Let's get it. But honestly, it is like our boy Silver said, it is in my top 10 for sure. It brought a lot of good themes, a lot of philosophy questions that I'm excited for. The fact that the author tried to bring reason and say that was going to be a combining hits me differently, because reason is not infallible. That's an enlightenment problem. We can talk about it later. But I'm just gonna.
We're gonna have a real interesting discussion around that. I feel like I've come full circles in a lot of ways. But we'll chat about that. I think from my perspective, this was definitely, to be honest with y'all, like this is, I don't recall a show having this big of an emotional impact on me since I watched Kill la Kill about a year ago.
Really?
So I think there was just something about,
wow.
Yes, wow.
Bold claims.
I know, so bold claims. So, and Kill la Kill is, for those who don't know, and Uncultured Swine, Kill la Kill is my favorite anime of all time. But in any case, as I was saying, so I think Beastars, whether it's like, the plot writing, like, look, I'm not the type of guy that tends to fixate on like structural literary analyses of shows, but I can tell you they do a really good job of like giving you nuanced characters, relatable characters. They do a good job of, setting up this story structure that goes from being like thematically focused to then being plot driven to then being like thematically focused again in a way that is like, I would say, it's structured, and it does a really good job of mixing predictability with unpredictability. The end of the show, I would have never predicted, or the end of the first season, I would have never predicted that that's where we were going to end up. And nonetheless, it made complete sense given everything that was set up during the first, 8 episodes or so. So I sincerely enjoyed this anime. As Silver said, it definitely cracks my top 10, and I'm very excited based off of conversations I've had with a couple of friends who've read the manga. I'm very excited for where the show is headed in the future, because apparently it only gets better from here. So that's how I feel about the show. And with that said, I think it makes sense for us to move into actually talking about some of the characters in the show, in particular the main characters. So I think with that said, let's dive into the person who is objectively the best character, aka
Jack
Legoshi.
Wait a minute. That's
Okay.
not Jack.
That's a weird way to say panda.
Speaking of Legoshi, he's obviously our main character. I think the first thing that you get into him is, like, at least in the dub, they do a very good job of just coming across about how socially nervous he is about everything, but that people who are socially nervous like that don't just, like, freeze up and, like, oh, they don't know what's going on. They're overthinking stuff so much that I was like, yes, as a Legoshi's a high school boy, and then I've also, just in my personal case, read a lot of puberty stuff into the story and tale, just how he goes about being a carnivore and smelling a bunch of things and being around a lot of people. That entire idea of, like, oh, my body's bigger than, like, other people, so I don't want to, like, hurt people, but I'm also trying to assert myself so I don't shrink away, and, like, just the beginning in that intro of him, of always worrying about how he is viewed and seen, but still having his own agency to try to do the things he wants to do, and then the classic misunderstandings that happen all in his own head, I found really endearing. So that was, like, my initial impressions of Legoshi. And then as the show goes on and his arc develops, you really do, like, see this man grow into the person he is, but he never stops being himself at all. I think there was just a moment. The only question I ever really had was like, there was a moment where he first meets like the panda, and then the moment where he declares his like spoilers, I guess, love for Haru the rabbit. That was like, it was the panda was the episode before, but then he declares his love later. But in the panda stuff, he was already talking about being in love, and I was like, oh, they probably should just switch those episodes. But other than that, his entire arc I thought was handled beautifully, handled very well, and he brings up a lot of like interesting discussions and at least ideas about like what it means to be like him in this society. And his intro was dope as hell too, with like the way they edited him with like the different red eyes and then the beast and how everything in the shot composition would work and how he's thinking and all that. That's what I got from Legoshi.
Honestly, like you hit it right on the nail, and like his anxious anxiety makes perfect sense for a society that says, oh, if you eat meat, you're first off terrible person. So like, and everything that any carnivore does, whether they're at the school or not, plays a part on every single carnivore known to man, to where everyone's like on pins and needles because they're like, oh, if I accidentally like scratch or roar, like I'm a representative for my whole I don't even know what to call it, species, not like beyond species.
Yeah, species and like
genus,
I guess like
type,
food source, like
yeah.
Social class. Honestly, that's what it is. It's like it's a social group.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. So let's call that, yeah, social group: carnivores, herbivores, and then you can break it down later. But like, yeah, like Legoshi as a character he's so sweet. He's nice. I could tell he cares, and like his love for Haru was so dynamic, because I'm like, man, what if he's really just because he like wants to eat her? What if that's the love? Gohan might have been onto something, especially that's his first meeting, but then the transfer, like, no, I actually like her, I care about her, and like, I thought it was gonna be more interesting with Juno in the mix, because I was like, oh, maybe. Maybe that's a spoiler. There's another girl called Juno that comes later, which is that's an alpha wolf right there. If we're gonna call some alpha, we're not playing games, but
Legoshi's a meme lord for when he was like holding her and was just like out here being like, oh yeah, this is just like, oh, I'm helping someone with their fucking dancing, and she's like, do you feel this? And he's like, I do. Your hands are like real soft. I don't know what he says, but something like that. And it's just like, Jesus, dude.
I think it says touching someone of your same species makes you calm, and then he like dips.
Oh yeah, killing like all of the romance of the scene. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Legoshi. I think he's an eminently relatable character. Again, Base is bringing the whole puberty thing, so now it's making me reflect back and be like, well, when we think about lived experience, like is a lot of his behaviors explainable by like puberty, and the fact like puberty is like a time where like you are having like your body's changing, you're developing like sexual like romantic interest for the first time, but you're also learning to navigate like the pitfalls of like romance, right? And so to be honest with y'all, I saw a lot of myself in Legoshi, and the way that he approaches like relationship with Haru at first. I think for a while that's kind of how I approach, like when I was in like high school and stuff, how I approach like romance, and it's through like a gradual process of like having multiple relationships. I kind of lost that orientation towards it, but I thought he's a very relatable character, and I think his dilemma, which we'll get into in more detail, of like instinct versus like the combination of like reason and like emotion, and like learning to like be able to like identify whether or not his like love for Haru is genuine, or if it's just like a like patina over his like natural instinct to like want to eat her, and like how he like struggles through that, and the way that kind of structures like his character arc and like the development of the story, I thought was like, it was profoundly well done. It allowed for the exploration of some like, honestly, it's like questions that you like, it's like, it makes me be like, well, like, you know, maybe there's some like wackos who would argue for, honestly, like there's a lot of wackos who argue for biological like essentialism or determinism in some ways throughout history and even in the contemporary day in our world, but not quite as like something that is like an actual object in like the world, something that actually affects people. And so this is like one of those like things that anime is perfect for, because it allows you to explore something that is a natural feature of this world, which is, you know, not a natural feature, can't be proven to be a natural feature of our world, and like really see how that plays out in relation to, you know, like the other capacities of like sentient beings. And so I thought he was such an interesting character, and like he displays like empathy, you know, in like a really cool way. His whole like dilemma with like, you know, like the fact that he feels very guilty about, like he has like a guilt complex around him being a carnivore, and like his relationship with like his friends who are like herbivores and stuff. And so I don't know, I love Legoshi. Definitely my favorite character of the show. Okay, so
one other thing I want to say about
Legoshi,
because I'm pretty sure like if we don't bring it up now, I don't think it's gonna be hard pressed to bring it in somewhere else in the entire show or in the entire podcast. Like the whole idea of like how much Legoshi matures and like how he views love, or how he acts on like how he feels about love. Because like literally the first like throughout like up until like I think it was like what, episode 6 or 7, it was one of those. He's like going back and forth like, how do I feel? Like I'm confused, blah blah blah. And then like they're at the like they're prepping the festival for the meteor, and he's up top and he sees Ruiz walking to Haru, and he's like, no, I love her. But it's like very clearly like the visuals, like him smearing all the pain on his face and his eyes slowly getting red and red, and like saying like, oh, I love her. It's very clearly showing like either like you can make that to be either just like he was conflicting infatuation, or like very like possessive love. He wanted to like, he was basically being very possessive of her. And like as the show went on, he started to like, granted by the end, like I still really doubt like they're like really like they come to terms with like if they really love each other. I'm sure like that's like more so for season 2. They're gonna explore that a little bit more. I think season 1 just did a good job like saying like, okay, here's where I am right now. I know what I need to do to like kind of figure this out moving forward. They still don't really like come to terms with like the whole love thing, I argue, even at the end. But he did mature a lot from like that episode to the very, very end, when he's literally like risking his life to like save her. Even if like he was, even during that like rescue mission, he was like, literally like contemplating back and forth like, wait, I just called her my prey. Like, what is she? Like, am I in love? Is she just my prey? Like, and then it goes back into like whole like instincts conversation. But I liked how they like portrayed his like character growth in like how he viewed love, and that it's hard to like differentiate that from the instincts conversation. But I felt like it was kind of distinct enough to bring it up.
Yeah, I think so. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think, oh boy, let me see if I can get this point back. It was, no, that's okay. I forgot about it. I'm sure I'll remember
if I could say
later on. But in any case, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's as if he took a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't complete like his journey, but there was definitely a noticeable step he took. Like, I think actually, now I think about it, wasn't this man walking up the stairs in the last episode to like the thing? Like, I'm not sure if that's intentional, but like, yeah, the idea is like at the beginning of the show, you have Legoshi, and you know him very. At least I felt like I could relate and understand. And I'm like, okay, this is how this character is, and this is how it's gonna go. And by the end of the show, I was like, oh, I've seen the journey. I understand where we are now and how it's gonna continue forward. But the show is not like predictable, I would say. Like, honestly, I thought the show was just gonna be high school, like, fun stuff. Not fun, but, like, high school stuff for, like, the longest time, because that's the setting we were in for a while. And then the last 4 episodes were just like, oh, God! Oh, Jesus! And then it was, like, a new direction that I think is very interesting, which is why I was like, should kids watch this? This is for grown people. Like,
oh yeah, this is a show for grown-ups. But I will say it's interesting to note how like on the subject of love, like he kind of goes through, I don't know if y'all can identify with this, I certainly can, but like the whole process of like, you know, never having felt like love before, or like this is like passionate love, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is like it's not like
are you talking about
set up that distinction. Yeah. People set up that distinction between like
at the beginning it was very, very like toxic, like possessive love.
Well, like, I think this is a slightly different. I think what I'm saying, like what you're saying, can be reconciled with what I'm saying, and I can explain how. But I'm trying to like talk about like the distinction between like what sometimes folks call like passionate love versus like companion love. I don't know. I think that's what it is. I'm not sure if that's the distinction, but it's like there's like the form of like love that's like characterized by like infatuation and like heightened feelings, and then once you are actually with someone, which we don't get to in the show, but once you are actually with someone for a while, that kind of like those rose-colored glasses fade, and then you just become friends with that person, and you end up with like, you know, typically, at least this is something that I've experienced, and I don't think I'm the only person who's experienced this, and then you end up with like kind of like friendly, like, you know, once you strip away all the illusions, kind of new thing that is also love. And arguably that's what like love looks like in like the longer term, beyond that like initial like phase of infatuation. But he very much goes through like the process, I think, of like you know, at first not even having any idea what like any form of love is, and then gradually coming to the realization that like maybe what he feels is like a kind of love or is love. And then that's kind of where we end up at like the end. I think Haru also has, you know, similar realizations, although we can get into like the whole like, well, like she went through like a lot of shit, man.
Yeah.
So like
we should transition into
yeah, we should
Haru.
transition. Yeah, I say let's transition into Haru with that. Haru, Rabbit Girl, let's go, fellas. Hit me with your best shot.
Okay, so personally, whenever she was like alone and not really interacting with the characters, it wasn't as heightened enjoyable for me, because I'm gonna come in, I have my own biases. I present male, born male, been treated as a male my whole life. And the way I interpret the show is Haru, even though she's like our herbivore insert, she's the person we're seeing from that side, like the small creatures that need to be protected, that's built into how they are. I still read her as a very gendered character, at least as a presenting woman, as like a small woman. Therefore, some of the things she was going to, while I could understand and see the perspective and found it interesting, I wasn't able necessarily as to connect really as well, because personally, I felt like, let's talk about like some of her sexuality stuff and how she like took agency in that stuff. I was able to watch it, but this is something I definitely would want to talk to like a presenting female, presenting woman about, because I was like, is this something, again, going back to the whole puberty thing and discovering your sexuality and how women go through that is very different than how presenting guys go through that, which is also different than how like non-binary people would go through that. And so that was like probably the only real barrier I ever had of maybe fully getting invested in the character. And I don't want to say it's like a barrier as in like, oh, it made the show bad, but that's like an area where I was like, whoa, okay, so this also has stuff for presenting women, I believe. Like this could be something interesting, that like another perspective that could be brought into. And that's how I got out of her character as she relates back to the both Legoshi and then the other third guy we're going to get to, Louis, in a bit. So that was like what I found interesting about her, and that this show encompasses a lot. It's just not only focused on like the male presenting male growing up puberty perspective. Like there is some woman insight in that.
And I think with her, I think we see this, and you know, I mean, we'll talk more about this a little bit later on. I'll just contain myself to talking about Haru's character. I mean, you know, like she is someone who has an inferiority complex. You know, we get to talk about the ways in which like, you know, different you know, characters as a result of like the tension between their like instincts and like, you know, social expectations and like social organization, like end up like internalizing like you know, psychological complexes or whatever. But Haru's basically which, you know, we will thematize a little bit more later on, but Haru basically has felt like she has no self-worth as a result primarily. But I think Base pointing this out is like saying that like, yo, like there is like a gender dynamic to like the show and to like her experience, and like the way that this would hit a female identifying person when they're like watching the show might, you know, I mean, it would likely be different than the way it hits us. And, you know, I think it's also with her, it's like, you know, the way she frames it primarily, like within the context of the show, is very much in terms of like, well, she's always felt weak. She's always felt like, you know, she was a vulnerable amongst like the most vulnerable and weakest, like, animals in society because of her being an herbivore and being like a small herbivore. And then the only time where she really, and the way that she was treated by like other people primarily, because of the fact that she's a small herbivore. But, you know, arguably you can't really fully disentangle like her being an herbivore from like, you know, gender dynamics completely, and the fact that it's like often guys who are like helping her and whatnot. But she like has a disdain for like compassion, and it's very interesting that she chose that word, because there's an understanding of compassion, and it makes me think of like you know, political philosophers like Hannah Arendt, who thinks of compassion as this kind of like hierarchical, somewhat in some cases thing where like you have like, you feel pity for like, you know, and in feeling pity for like another person, you kind of establish your superiority over them. And so she very much has this like issue where, you know, she feels like no one recognizes her for who she actually is, and so she feels like she has no like value, if that makes sense. And so because of that, she turns towards like promiscuity, because when she, you know, first engages in her initial promiscuous act, that's the first time where like through that like sense of intimacy with like another person, she feels like you know, physical pleasure that kind of meets that like mental psychological pain or gap that she has. And so she's a real interesting character. She's also like the well, ooh, boy, I was about to get into that. But she's also like the like part of like a like love triangle between like the two main boys in the show, Louis and Legoshi. And so that's the dynamic that very much colors like the plot of the first season, and that very much like, especially once like both like Louis and Legoshi discover that the other has, you know, in one case like a pre-existing relationship, and then in another case like a budding relationship with Haru, then that's something that ends up like being very like impactful on like the story. So anybody else?
I was gonna say, at least I've talked to like different women identifying people, especially about like sexual liberty and claiming that as a power, which I feel like Haru is like, they're taking on that movement in her character in a way that's like, especially like looking at Haru, and this does not translate to like, oh, women can only do this. That's not what I'm saying when I'm about to go into this. But looking at the context of the show and Haru like being a literal rabbit as her power, and then like being like, okay, what can I do? What's my most ability? Her like, when she takes control and like takes power and like changes her world, is like through sexual acts, as well as like her being an independent person as well, to be like, I'm gonna break any taboo or mold that you think. I can do what I want, and it's not because I'm just a rabbit. Like, I'm strong and powerful, and you'll notice me. To be able to use this sexual power to be like, oh, Louis, mine. Legoshi, anytime. Like, I bet I can do this. He's a predator, I'm a prey, but in this instance, I'm definitely the predator and he's the prey. In those type of moments with him, if we're gonna look at like, oh, the idea of like innocence versus, oh, I don't know what this is, I've never done this, like in that type of sense. And I think it gives Haru like a strong dynamic as to where it's like, oh, she can't do anything, but Haru literally can like pull strings whenever she wants. Like, if she really wants to like pit Legoshi, Louis, and like start causing drama, like she literally has this whole character in her triad, like the little popular girl, I forgot her name, hating her existence because her boyfriend fell in love with her over one night after, and according to Haru, after a kiss, and like it was over between them, and she lost her whole pedigree, top prestige, whatever she was trying, like elitism type of mindset, and she basically said, yeah, it doesn't matter because I can do this, and I can do this to whoever. Deal with it, try again later. And I think that like brings to her like a new strength that we don't talk about, and like, wow, the ability to break taboos. God, of high school reference. But the ability to break taboos is beyond powerful and beyond strong, and should be addressed like that too.
Right, yeah. So I think it's like It's an interesting mix, and I would say, I mean, absolutely pro-sexual liberation, do your thing, girl. Just in general. And then there's also like the moral dimension and like causing harm to like other people too. And like then there's also like it's complex, so it's like all of those things are tied into one as it starts, right? So it's like it is a way for her to like horizontalize like power relationships in her life. But is it like is she approaching it from like a healthy perspective? You know, that's like an interesting
That
like
is true.
like it's like she does have these like deep seated issues, and like the sex is not like helping her like overcome her issues per se, or at least that's not how the show is presenting itself. And like in the instance with like, so I think it's like you gotta recognize like the good, the bad, and the neutral in this instance. And like in the case with like, you know, the other like the Harlequin rabbit, it's like it is kind of fucked up, you know, like the context of like monogamous relationships. Because again, we can get into the whole like, you know, polyamory versus like monogamy. Sure, you know, I'm all for polyamory, but at the same time, it's like within the context of like people having like, you know, monogamous relationships, if that's what was going on, which is what's implied but not stated, like there is a moral harm that happens there. And like granted, like the reaction of like the Harlequin rabbit is like totally like over the line, like the classism that she brings to the table, like the speciesism, I guess, like whatever you want to call it, like breedism, but like totally over the line, the like mistreatment and like abusiveness towards like Haru, totally not okay. And like props to Haru for standing up for herself in those like instances and like being like, yo, like, you know, this happened, but I'm also not gonna like just lie here and like keep on like taking this like abusive behavior, you know. But it's like a complex dynamic. Like I would like to see her move as like her character, like move towards a place where like she does find on her own, like not because of a relationship with a guy, but like on her own finds like a sense of like self-worth, and is like put in like a position to be an agent as regards her like relationships. I would absolutely love to see that. And like we gotta also recognize that that's not where she's at the beginning of the story, and arguably that's not really where she's at even at the end of like season 1, because like they leave some loose strings with like Louis, you know what I'm saying? Big loose strings with like Louis, and she still has like, I think most people, or like a good amount of people, can attest to this. You can have romantic feelings for more than one person at a given time, you know. That can be a thing, you know. And especially when there's like years of relationship, you know, between like her and like Louis, for instance, like that is a very complex like situation. So I think, you know, it's one of those things where it's like you recognize the good, you recognize the bad, you point out like things that are morally harmful, things that are psychologically harmful, and then you just like move on and hope for the best in the character, and you empathize with the character. But unless anybody has any other thoughts on Haru,
I still have some more. And just to like go with that. Yeah, I wasn't saying like her power was like good all the time. There definitely was some wrong times. Like the whole thing, even though I said, yeah, she shouldn't have been bullied, but also he shouldn't have cheated in their relationship like that and had that go. So that I definitely do recognize the good and bad. And I also want to recognize, before we get too much in like sexual things, like Haru has a strong ownership over her garden. Like I know we haven't talked about that. And like she does take pride in her work. People do come for, like, in her alone time, she did, like, oh, yeah, I planted this. I became president of the garden club. Now I'm the only person, but this is where I put my pride and effort into. And she does, I argue that she does find her worth. And that, of course, the show doesn't highlight that in most of her moments, especially toward later, because then it's like it's all about the other characters involved with her. But I was toward the beginning and like even toward the middle, there were strong moments. Was, oh yeah, like I'm all about my garden. This is this. Oh yeah, I do this. The other stuff is just for fun, and I'm both like. And it goes to like, I don't know. We can even say like providing. Like we can say like, oh, is this gonna hint at something like this? When's the garden gonna come back? But that is a strong character trait as well that we can look into.
Yeah, no, and I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because I actually hadn't given much thought to like the garden, but it's like certainly like it's an intimate space over which she has like full autonomy, right? Yeah. Like symbolically, I mean, like she is she runs the club. She cares very deeply about like the plants. And like, I don't know, it's just interesting, and like that's where like most of her like sexual encounters take place. And so it would just be interesting to see like what does it mean for like, in its most like healthy way for Haru to kind of move beyond the garden, for the whole garden to be like, or for the world to become like her garden. I don't know if that sounds a little cheesy.
That sounds very cheesy.
No, I get
Oh, brother, you
And
cracked
no-
the code.
it. Yo, when you said
Galaxy
that,
brain
I'm
moment.
definitely not gonna
You
try to
said her
cut that out
sexual-
when I edit. I'm kidding.
don't. When you said that her sexual acts happen in the garden, it made me think like, wow, like in the garden, she is the apex. Because like rabbits eat plants, the plants can't eat her. Like she's
That's
the
a
predator
big
in
brain
there.
moment.
Oh,
Yo,
no.
she's the one in charge in that. Her power.
There's
We
seeds
can move away
being-
from Haru, but I'm thinking.
seeds being planted in a garden.
Also, the garden is where she fell in love with Louise.
Right.
Yeah, and where Louis fell in love with her.
Allegedly, I mean, he was real quick to give her up.
Oh,
Louis
is-
is in love with
he is-
Legoshi. He's in love with both of them.
Oh my god. He is in love with her, but it's complicated, and this is all connected to like his character arc and his lie and all that shit. So I think
Well,
that kind of makes sense. Now we can move to like Louis.
Okay.
Senor
let me
Stag.
leave the girl I love to the Yakuza.
Bro, he is a stag, bro.
This man,
Yeah.
okay. I was watching the show, it was fine, but the second this man came on screen in his suit and everyone was like, he's the Beastars, it's Louis. I was like, oh, it's going to be like this character at all. He's like the preppy Papa's dude. Nah, I have very rarely have many times where you see a character have complete command of not just the characters in the show, but my attention as well. I am like, this man is the pinnacle of what I just love in a character. Someone who's like completely confident in who they are, what they want to be, and they absolutely know their role that they play in society, even if they hate it or don't exactly like love it. He's like dedicated to his craft, and that's why the entire like acting arc of like the first couple episodes I was so invested in, because like I just love those characters that put on that unnecessary personal pressure to themselves where they're just like, I have to be perfect, and even if these other parts of the show around me are failing, are falling, or whatever, I have to tell these people what they want to hear. Like the whole scene where he's walking between the characters and telling them that like, we've practiced so long, but in his head's like, we suck. There's something interesting about that, because those are feelings that I very much can identify with. The idea of like internally struggling with the idea of like, none of this is gonna work out as best as I have, but I have to trust and believe in both my own abilities and like rely on other people to do their parts as well. Not saying like I'm over here being like a superstar or something, but the idea of like, I gotta do this for the betterment of the team. I can't just come out and criticize and tell everyone they suck, because that's not gonna get it across. I literally have to bring it out of them as a like team leader or like a captain on a sports team or someone in student government. And that's why I just love seeing him on screen holding himself up to a higher standard. Like the whole thing about his leg and dealing with injuries is something that as like a former athlete is just like, oh, it just like hurt my head, because I was just like, yes, the idea of like, oh, this is obviously something bad. Obviously this is something you should go and take care of. There are bigger things than just this performance or whatever. But the dedication to still try to go through it is something that I don't think a lot of people really get a look into in our media. And not in the sacrificial way of like, oh, I'm hurt, but I'm going to keep going for my ideals, but in the way of like, no, I have to even like act like I'm not hurt at all and that I can take this, not just for them, but for myself as well. Because if I fail, what's the entire point of my life? You know what I mean?
So it's interesting that you had that reading, because I think there's a lot of like very positive traits to Louis, but I also think one of his like central dynamics is that like the dynamic of like authenticity versus inauthenticity, and feeling like he has to like always keep up appearances because of this, like, I mean literally like his life, you know what I mean, like the fact that he was like rescued from like the black market, he was gonna be eaten,
That hit me like a
and then
truck.
the guy who was gonna be his dad was like, I saved you because of your like sense of like justice, I saved you because I see you like you know, being like a symbol of like society and like of like coexistence and bringing like herbivores and carnivores together basically. Like, and I also can't have a son, so like, you know, now you're gonna be my son, and these are the expectations placed on you literally from day one. And also like I'm kind of an asshole because I'm gonna make you like fight like potentially like have to fight carnivores to live, which was also like, gotta say, dope scene, like in the way that like he, instead of like deciding to fight the carnivores, he like contemplates like killing himself and like using his agency in like that manner. Like that was like an interesting thing. Makes me think back to like the conversation we had in our second episode about like Ray and the Promised Neverland.
Oh yeah.
But in any case,
also Father of the Year.
Father of the Year. But in any case, I think he really like, it's like he constantly like berates Legoshi for this, where he's like, why are you being submissive? And there's like personal like, you know, lived experiences behind this, because he's like, basically like when we learn about what happened to him in the black market, that kind of recontextualizes that dynamic. And it's very much like, look, like predators, or like, look, like carnivores are carnivores, herbivores are herbivores. Or it's like there are like real distinctions between us, and there's like a dynamic in him where it's like he wants to transcend that, but at the same time he like has this like almost like in some ways spite towards Legoshi, because he's like, don't like pretend, like don't like shrink away, don't like hide, don't be submissive, like just show me who you actually are, right. Show me like what your like ferocity is. Like I much prefer that kind of a carnivore that is just out in my face as like a threat than like the kind of carnivore that like pretends to like, you know, like be friendly with like herbivores and then turns around and eats them.
Be authentically,
you know, so that's like a thing that's like, be authentically yourself. But then he himself, and a lot of it is him projecting, because he's not authentically himself in any way, shape, or form. And you see that in that scene, you know, right? Which is like very much like there is the social role, which is like, you know, an interesting thing. But at the same time, like when he's walking, he's like, his real feelings are like, y'all are shit. You know what I mean? And like he can't like express himself like right before they do the play, right? Because he just feels like tethered to this like ideal of like who he should be and who he should become, and it's constricting. And it's like arguably the same thing, like it leads him to act against his like actual desires and his actual like, you know, like how he actually, you know, his actual feelings. Like when he, you know, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when he chooses like not to initially go out to save Haru after she's been kidnapped by like the mob of like lions, he wanted to go out and save her, but it's when he's convinced by like somebody who in some ways is a reflection of like the path on which like, you know, which is like the mayor, who's also a lion, who's a reflection of like the path that like, you know, Louis would have to basically go on to become this like symbol that like transcends like he's a mirror image, like the symbol that like transcends like the herbivore and like carnivore binary and brings people together in coexistence. Like that's like the mayor in that case. And he is like, you're right, there's no way I could possibly save her, and this would have too much of a like detrimental impact on society and the way and like relations between carnivores and herbivores. So I'm not going to actually, I'm gonna like be in a state of bad faith. Like I'm not going to actually exercise my freedom the way that I would like to exercise my freedom. I'm going to instead allow this to happen and let the woman that I love die. Which is like, I mean, he's a complex character. He's a really interesting character.
His life is toxic as hell. I'll say that. Like he has a lot of constricting natures, as you said. But I think that's what made it so much interesting to see what he's gonna do, because he knows, he's like, this isn't good or right or whatever. But I just love seeing characters that are like, I am going to decide, and it's like a parallel. Legoshi doesn't, at the beginning at least, have a lot of decision moments. Things get decided for him, whereas Louis is like having things, he's deciding, he's doing XYZ, and then they kind of cross over at that moment, as you said, with the whole who goes to go save Haru. Legoshi decides to go do it, while at first Louis is like very questioning who he is and who he's going to be. And I think that's a nice like parallel between the characters like influencing each other and all that. And that honestly, again, Louis is just like, probably, like I said, the most complex, layered character I found from the show. That's just like, I love seeing him on screen, because I was like, what is he going to do next? What is his next problem that he's gonna have to solve? And the complex is going to reveal about his character.
And he's like so fundamentally unhappy.
Yes.
Which is he's so unhappy. Like, this ideal is an ascetic ideal. It's like he's having to sacrifice himself to live up to this ideal for this, like, broader purpose of, like, social cohesion. And you see it, like, this man can't even decide who he actually wants to love, because it's all about, like, you know, which granted, like, again, like, he actually does have a decision, but it's like this broader ideal would, like, lead him to believe that, like, nope, I gotta marry another deer. And she's gotta be of, like, a high status and a high pedigree, and I can't marry a rabbit if I want to be this, like, transcendent figure, because that just wouldn't reflect well on, like, the status of, like, my family or, like, my status. And it's like these things just, like, eat him apart, man. They just eat him up. Just makes him a super interesting character.
Louis could by himself be his own show, and I would watch every episode faithfully. And, like, just going back to his, like, complexity, I was over here writing notes down, and, like, especially looking at the inauthenticity of what it is, like, he's, like, as you said, unhappy, but so self-hating. Like, he was prey, raised to be predator, and hates every bit of it. And he enthused, I'm gonna take it because I want to, like, ascend, but can't in, like, some of the most important ways. Like, the whole play, like, he's the star of is, like, I'm a superhero, like, deer, I can live, I can fight whoever, I don't have fangs, but I have a sword, so now I do have weapons, and this is gonna be my show, my cat, no one will take it. And, like, I think it was, like, a bigger thing, like, than people understand, like, of Bill taking on that role to be head stag. I'm not sure what the play is called.
The Shinigami.
The Shinigami, yeah. Like, I think that was, like, more symbolic, like, especially in, like, our boy Louis' life, like, and then for him to come back out and take that role back from a predator, foreshadowing maybe other things that he might try and take back if he starts, like, breaking, like, hey, I don't care anymore. And, like, especially him coming, like, even though we're like, oh yeah, Legacy, like, saved Haru, but Louis was out there cleaning up, came back behind him, was there. And I don't know, like, if there's more that he did that we don't realize, because there might be the fact that it showed him there. I was like, oh, maybe he's doing more. And this idea of being the Beastar could play in to a lot more things than I think we're gonna see. I only seen the one season, but I'm excited for it. And I think Louis overall, like, holding on to this, like, I think he definitely embodies, I'm giving myself up for the movement, whether I want to or not, good or bad. And I'm excited to see how that conflicts, and if he ever changes his mind about it.
And then the one thing,
so much off balance.
The thing I'd like to end on for Louis, because I feel like we should, like, move on. We've talked to him for, like, a little bit. Seconding everything everyone has said, nothing more needs to be said about that, but I argue, like, it's really, honestly, for me it was a twist, because I was not expecting him to be the person. Spoilers, 3, 2, 1, when he's the one that saves, like, Legoshi and Haru to be able to leave by, like, killing the head Yakuza guy. Like, the one moment in the entire show where he actually drops his act and is actually, like, his authentic self and does what he actually wants to do. Like, it's the first time you actually see him, like, break out, like, laughing. I mean, granted, like, kind of frantically, but it's the first time you actually just see him being his true self. It's unfortunate that, like, it results in, all we know right now is that he's missing. But so my prediction was that he probably is going to go back to the slave trade, and that's probably going to be where season 2 starts off.
Last thing, and y'all are gonna hate me for this, but when you brought up the whole Beastar and working from the shadows, I just got strong Naruto vibes, where Naruto's the Hokage, but Sasuke is out there doing, like, the shadow Hokage stuff, and, like, Hokage literally means, like, fire shadow, and that's, like, the whole idea. But, like, I don't know, that's something I could see where it's like, oh, Legoshi continues working in, like, the light and on that side, but because there's this whole undercurrent that Louis knows that Legoshi he can't handle this, that I'm gonna take this on as someone who's raised from here. It's like the whole Bane, it's like, I was raised in the shadows, like, all that stuff. That's just something else that's just something else I thought of just now, but that could be some direction they're going in. But yeah, honestly, when it was like, dear missing. I was like, no! Come back!
Greedy Beastar.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Bass here. Thank you so much for listening to our first episode dive in on Beastars. If you could tell, we really enjoyed it. Stay on the lookout for part 2 coming soon. If you want to keep up with all of our happenings, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Twitter at BoizAnime, B-O-I-Z Anime. Also, your Ramblin Boiz have a YouTube channel. Our podcast episodes can be listened to at the Anime Ramblin Boiz YouTube page, but we also have a channel dedicated to more in-depth analysis done by us outside of the podcast at Otakutariat. That's Otakutariat. We're growing it little by little and we'll be eternally grateful for any likes, subscribes, and comments you can leave over there. Otakutariat also has a Twitter at Otakutariat. Finally, if you like what we do and want to support us more directly, make sure to head over to our Patreon at Patreon/Otakutariat. I know that was a lot of information, but I promise you there will be more Ramblin Boiz content in the future. This is Bass, signing off.